Welcome to the Classical Liberal Arts Academy's Petty School Reading Program. In this lesson, we'll continue our study of English reading. We must always remember that English is made up from many different languages and has many different dialects. English is made up from many different languages and has many different dialects. We've learned that English is made up of the Greek and Latin languages, and also the Old English and Middle English dialects. English also comes from the French and German languages. And we've learned that there are 4 basic steps for reading English words. There are 4 steps for reading English words. The first step is to think of what spoken word you may be reading. Think of what spoken word you may be reading. Remember, written words are symbols for spoken words, so use your knowledge of spoken words to help you read. The second step is to read with classical letter sounds. Read with classical letter sounds. This will help you to read and understand most English words that come from Latin and Greek. Read with classical letter sounds. If you try to read by thinking of what spoken word you may be reading, and that doesn't help, and you try to read with classical letter sounds, and that doesn't help, then you should try to read with ecclesiastical sounds. Many English words come from church history and are spoken with church pronunciation. The fourth and final step is to read with sounds from other languages and dialects our English comes from. Read with sounds from other languages and dialects our English comes from. We've learned about the Old English dialect. Old English is the dialect of English spoken by King Arthur long ago. It has different sounds than Latin. Old English. We also learned about Middle English. Middle English is the dialect of English spoken by the Normans long ago. It has different sounds than Latin and Old English. Middle English. In this lesson, we're going to study Early Modern English. Early Modern English is the dialect of English spoken around the time when books started to be printed with machines. Early Modern English is the dialect of English spoken around the time when books started to be printed with machines. If you look at the pictures on your screen, you can see on the top that books were printed by hand. Scribes would write out the books. Later, books started to be printed with machines. You can see in the bottom picture what a book looks like that's printed with a printing press. Early Modern English is the dialect of English spoken around the time when books started to be printed with machines. The printers spelled words as they were spelled in Middle English. The printers spelled words as they were spelled in Middle English. But the words at that time were spoken in modern English. The words at that time were spoken in modern English. Words were no longer written as they sounded. Words were no longer written as they sounded. Spoken words and written words were different for the first time because of the printing press. Spoken words and written words were different for the first time because of the printing press. For the first time, words were no longer spelled as they sounded. Words were no longer spelled as they sounded. And this is why English is very difficult to read and spell today. This is why English is very difficult to read and spell today. The sounds of modern English were different from the sounds of Middle English. The sounds of modern English were different from the sounds of Middle English. Let's study these different sounds. In our last lesson on Middle English, we learned about the final A, called the schwa. We learned that at the end of Middle English words, the schwa was pronounced with the sound In modern English, the final A is ignored. In modern English, this schwa at the end of a word is silent. It's not read. We'll see an example of this in a couple more slides. The final schwa is ignored in modern English. We also learned in Middle English the long ah was pronounced just like the Latin ah. In modern English, the sound of this letter changes from ah to a. The sound of the long ah changed from ah to a. Let's look at a few words from Middle English and see how their sounds changed in modern English. Here we see a word that has a long ah and a final schwa. In Middle English, this word was read as nama, nama. In modern English, the pronunciation of the word changed. The final schwa was dropped and ignored. The long ah changed to make the sound eh. Instead of reading this word nama, it was read as name, name. The Middle English was nama. The modern English was name, name. Let's look at another example. In Middle English, this word was read as spasa, spasa. You can hear the long ah, spa, and you can hear the final schwa, spasa, spasa. In modern English, the sound of this word changed. The final schwa was dropped and made silent. The long ah changed to make the sound eh. Instead of reading this word spasa, modern English reads this word as space. Space. The second important change in modern English has to do with the long e. In Latin and in Middle English, we learned that this letter is read with the sound e. E. In modern English, this sound changes from e to e. In modern English, this letter is read with the sound E. Let's look at a few examples and see how this sound changed in modern English. We learned that in Middle English, this word was read as techa, techa. You can see the long A after the letter T, and you can see the final schwa, techa, techa. In modern English, the final schwa is silent, and the long e changes to e. In Middle English, this word was read as techa, but in modern English, this word is read as teach, teach. In Middle English, we learned that the double E was pronounced as eh, just like the long eh. In Middle English, this word was read as sueta, sueta. In modern English, the long eh changes to the sound E, and the final schwa is dropped. In Middle English, this word was read as sueta, but in modern English, it's read sweet, sweet. The next important change in modern English has to do with the long E. We learned that the sound E could be written in Latin and later in modern English with the letters E or what we call Y. Both of these letters would be read as E. But in modern English, this changes. The long E changes to I, I. It's actually a double sound, which is called a diphthong. I, I. Let's look at a few examples that show us this change. We learned that in Middle English, this word was pronounced as tima, tima. You can see the long E written with the letter Y and the final schwa, tima. In modern English, this changes. In modern English, this is read as time, time. You can see that the long E changes to I, and the final schwa is dropped. Time, time. In Middle English, we learned that this word was read as misa, misa. In modern English, the long E sound changes to I, and the final schwa is silent. In Middle English, this is pronounced misa, but in modern English, it's pronounced mice, mice. The next important sound change has to do with what we call the double O. We learned that in Middle English, the double O was pronounced O, just like a long Latin O. In modern English, this changed and is pronounced oo. The double O of Middle English is pronounced as oo in modern English. Let's look at a few examples. In Middle English, we learned that this word would be pronounced as god, god. The double O is read as a long O. In modern English, this changes. It's no longer pronounced as god, but in modern English is pronounced good, good. Again, in Middle English, the double O was pronounced as O, and this word would have been read as boat, boat. However, in modern English, the double O is read as oo, and this word is pronounced boot, boot. In Middle English, we learned about the W, and we said the W is pronounced with the sound W. In Middle English, the W was read as W anytime it was seen in a word. But in modern English, the W is sometimes ignored. It's not read at all. Let's look at an example. In Middle English, we learned that this word was read as waronga, waronga. In modern English, the W is ignored. We don't read this word as warong. In modern English, we read it as wrong, wrong. The W is silent, wrong. We also learned about the cluster KN, and we said that in Middle English this is read as kn, kn. In modern English this changed. The K became silent, and this is read simply as n, n. Let's look at an example. In this example, there are three things for us to look at. First of all, we have the cluster KN at the beginning of the word. Second, we have a long E in the middle of the word. And lastly, we have a final schwa. In the cluster KN, the K in modern English is going to be silent. The long E in the middle of the word is going to become I, and the final schwa will become silent. In Middle English, we would read this word as knifa, knifa. But in modern English, we read this word as knife, knife. With the cluster GH, in Middle English, this was read as g, g. But in modern English, this cluster can be read in many different ways. You'll see it with all different sounds in modern English. Sometimes it will be silent. Sometimes it will be pronounced just like Middle English. Sometimes it will be pronounced like f, like the letter F. The cluster GH is one of the strangest groups of letters in modern English because it's pronounced in so many different ways. Let's look at an example. In Middle English, this word would have been read as knigut, knigut. However, in modern English, the first letter K is silent. The long E in the middle of the word becomes I, and the GH cluster is silent. Both letters are silent. In Middle English, this was knigut. But in modern English, this word is pronounced night, night. Do you see how difficult English reading and spelling can be? All of these letters, and only 3 of them, are actually read with any sound. Night, night. You can see that reading and spelling in modern English is very confusing. Today, the only way you can know for sure how to spell an English word is to use a dictionary. The only way you can know for sure how to spell an English word is to use a dictionary. That's because dictionaries made the rules for spelling in English. The dictionary was invented so that all men would spell words the same way. The dictionary was invented so that all men would spell words the same way. At different times in history, English-speaking people spelled words differently. They spelled the words the way they sounded, and many people spelled words in different ways. The dictionary was invented so that all men would spell words the same way. Many of the spellings make sense based on the way the writer pronounced his words when the dictionary was first made. Many of the spellings make sense based on the way the writer pronounced his words when the dictionary was first made. The men who wrote the dictionaries wrote the words with letters the way they pronounced the words. We have to memorize the spelling because that's the way our books are printed. We have to memorize the spelling because that's the way our books are printed. The printers of books follow the spellings in the dictionary. So we have to memorize the spelling because that's the way our books are printed. You will learn to spell more and more words the more you read and write. There's no easy way to master English spelling. You will learn to spell more and more words the more you read and write. There's no easy way to master English spelling. And always remember this rule. You should never guess at the spelling of words. You should never guess at the spelling of words. If you don't know how to spell a word, you should look it up in a dictionary or ask someone for help. Never guess at the spelling of words. Look them up or ask for help. We hope that you've enjoyed this lesson in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy's Petty School Reading Program. For more resources from the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, visit us online at classicalliberalarts.com. God bless.